What's up, listeners? It's Andrea. Today, it's the outer light. Masaka is waking, and we ask the question, why isn't anyone freaking out about the loose snakes? Stick with us.
Welcome to the TNG Podcast, the number one place in the Alpha Quadrant to geek out about all things Star Trek: The Next Generation. I'm your co-host, Shereese.
Hey, I'm your co-host, Andrea. Today, we're talking Season 7, Episode 17, Masks. This episode was written by Joe Menosky and directed by Robert Weimer. While investigating a rogue comet, the cultural archive concealed inside begins taking over both the Enterprise and Data. Bum, bum, bum.
Bum, 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 bum. I added some extra because that's like, I remembered the artifact, but I didn't remember it was hidden inside a comet. So when they showed that part, I was like, oh man, like I wouldn't even probably think that there was something inside of the comet other than just more rocks and space debris.
Right.
And that would be quite a shock.
More rock.
Yeah.
Of course, as I told you, my little childhood trauma story about how I got a geode and I thought all rocks look like. The only way that would have been cooler is if there was a geode inside that comet.
Yeah, unless that geode turned out to be the crystalline entity's brother. Bum,
no!
bum, bum.
Okay, now we just launched a new fanfic. Okay.
They'd be like, I know what you did to my brother. Yeah, this would be a whole,
summer. Yeah.
A whole thing. So, okay, my initial thoughts on this episode. I love this episode. To me, this episode is exactly like Inner Light, except for the Enterprise becomes the culture and the whole ship is forced to experience it. That's why I love it. Because this to me is like Inner Light, but like inverted.
It's Outer Light. Yeah.
It's Outer Light. Yeah, because Inner Light, we had all that rich culture, but it was trapped inside one person's experience in their mind. No one else knew what was going on. And everyone else only learned about it from his reports. Like his stale AF captain's log reports when he recovered. And that doesn't give you a feel of what he actually went through. How could you possibly explain in writing or words what he experienced?
Yeah.
And so I feel like this episode gives the entire ship, whether they like it or not, just like whether Picard liked it or not, an experience of this entire culture. And maybe it's only one part of this culture, right? Just like the ceremonial part and stuff. But still, I just thought that was such a cool idea.
I never, ever considered this to be the outer light or inner light adjacent, like anything. But when you say it like that, it's like, oh, yeah, of course it could be. Like, this is such a cool concept. I remember, I haven't watched this episode for a very long time. I remembered Masaka and Data playing all the characters. So in my mind, and I haven't seen it since I was a kid, I remember it being like kind of dumb, but like a fun episode. Big like Library of Alexandria vibes, which I really enjoy. But I remember the whole thing feeling like not super well flushed out or maybe rushed. But again, like this was like my initial thoughts thinking back to having seen it like 25 years ago or something, right?
Yeah. I don't think I would have appreciated it as much as a kid, but I'm sure I loved seeing Brent Spiner play all the roles. So I'm sure I still loved it. But I don't think I made the connection of Inner Light like I do as an adult.
No, totally. But I will say this, like spoiler, my final thoughts are totally different. Like I really, really enjoyed this episode a lot. And I love the idea of
I'm so excited.
Okay,
because you were like, oh, that episode's dumb. And I was like, I love that episode.
You're like, oh, yeah, it is. Yeah, it is dumb. I don't know what I was thinking.
No, I was like, it's not dumb. I mean, I had to give it to you on the ghost sex episode where I was like, I like that episode. And then I watched it and I was like, oh gosh, this is terrible. Like I had to give it to you on that one. But this one, I was like, no, I like this one. It was a good episode. And I have some serious concerns about having Data on the crew because he could just be reprogrammed at the drop of a hat. Please. We're about to have Genesis in a couple weeks, and that's the same thing that could happen to any biological system if you have the right circumstances.
I guess you're right.
He's the only one who couldn't become a giant spider or gorilla or something.
Or Troy becomes a
fish. Yeah.
I do love that episode because it's cool to see like,
it's so
Klingon Worf. But yeah, you're right.
I love that episode.
I always worry about Data because I'm like, Data can just be like fucking reprogrammed, even like from afar by lore with the chip. And suddenly he's like a dangerous person with super strength. Did you see what he did to those security guards in front of his quarters? Man, what are you going to do to Data?
To be fair,
Data.
What were they thinking to just put 2 security guards on the door? I mean, that was kind of on them.
Force field that shit or something. I don't know what to do anyway.
Try a lock. But
put him on definitely a shuttlecraft with no propulsive systems on a tractor beam, so he's just there, but he can't get out.
I feel like some people, Data being one for sure, if he's confined and he's not in his right mind, it needs to be a level 10 force field situation.
Yeah, it
not
does.
a 2 guards at the door. Because basically Wesley was able to escape his 2 guards at the door. Like we need that is for people who are in confinement of their own volition or whatever.
Yes,
like,
yes.
People who like when Riker
100%.
was like, when they were like, Riker, you messed up, you're confined to quarters. I mean, that's when you could throw a guard outside if you need to, but he's not really going to leave. But if you actually want to keep somebody in the room, the 2 guards at the door is not the way to go. I think we've established that.
It totally
for literally anyone, and especially not Data.
Yep.
Well, anyways, I'm so glad that you like this episode. So
I do.
Starting out, we start in this classroom and all these kids are like sculpting out of clay, which I remember doing that as a kid. And it was really, really cool.
Really fun.
Yeah, really fun. I know you've done that as an adult.
I have done ceramics as an adult, and I was actually going to talk about it with this episode. But yeah, I really, really enjoy it a lot. It's a very relaxing and meditative process, of course, and I like to throw on the wheel. So like it's really calming and cool and you get to be creative. But also, girl, when you're making the like perfect bowl or vase or whatever, and then you just pull a little too much and the whole thing collapses, you're like, son of a bitch. Like you gotta start all over again. So it can be a little frustrating, but I thought this class was cute.
Yeah. I would say that's
the Alexander in there.
You know what? That was a missed opportunity. Alexander should have absolutely been. Instead, they had a different little boy. But
they had a boy, Eric. But yeah, I was
they
like,
should.
okay.
You're right. I didn't even think about that at all. You're right. Alexander should have been in this, and he would have been totally adorable. But in any case,
and not problematic at all.
No, he would have been totally adorable, making some cool little targ or something like that,
right? And like a forehead cast or something.
Something that would have been so cute. But the little boy they had was super cute anyways. So Troy's going around like helping the kids. And I was like, is Troy a teacher now? I was so confused. But later on, like the little boy, Eric, is like, what do you think? I think the bird, looks a little weird or whatever. And she explained that she was there, that she wasn't the art teacher. The art teacher was roaming around the background. But her job, the reason she was there is that she wanted to help the kids express their feelings in their sculptures, which I was like, dude,
thank you.
How cool is that? I remember doing clay stuff when I was a kid and I made a little ashtray for my mom because my parents smoked. So that's what I did. I made an ashtray. It's so funny looking back as a kid. I'm like, oh, that's so problematic. But this was the 80s, so everybody smoked. So I'm sure my teacher was just like, oh, make me one too.
Seatbelts then. Do you remember what child car seats looked like? It was just a metal cage you put the baby in. Fucking metal cage, girl. Ashtray was the least of the 80s problems. Man, I miss those times though, I gotta say. But anyway, yeah.
Looking back, I'm just like, seriously, this is what I mean. This is what we mean when we're like, your kids know everything. Your teachers know everything that's going on at home. But yes, I made my mom an ashtray, and I'm just thinking like, how cool would it have been if there was some kind of counselor or something, TA, maybe my teacher going around saying like,
help you with your like feelings and imagination,
just to be like, how do you feel about, or like, how do you feel about your mom, or how do you feel about your family, or like put your feelings inside something that you're sculpting. Like, I just think that would have been really special. So I really enjoyed, even though this was like a 30-second interaction between Troy and Eric, I was like, this is so neat. Like, this is the future.
Yeah, it is the future where people are more in touch with their feelings. And I think that we're starting to see a lot more of that these days. And I like seeing that. Like, it
was ahead of its time.
It was definitely ahead of its time. And I'm seeing a lot of that now with kids where they're like a lot more able to express their emotion without reservation or more like emotionally intelligent. So I'm like, yay, this is the start of that. Now, she goes over and who is one of the students in the class but Data, which I thought was so adorable. It gave me like throwback to like Elf vibes, or like, Will Ferrell is like all giant in the classroom among like all the other like fourth grade boys or whatever. And he is sculpting a data pad.
And he made it perfectly.
He made it perfectly. And he said it is within 1.3% accuracy to its specifications. And Deanna's like, well, that's cool, but I'm here to like help you with like your imagination, and just copying something isn't really. So she says, why not try sculpt something more abstract like music? And he just makes a treble clef. I mean, it's a perfect treble clef, but it's like, it's beautiful. Just made a treble clef.
Right. And Troy goes, and he had some questions too. He was like, how do I sculpt music? Music's not a thing. And she was like, well, the feelings around music and the emotions around music and the images that come to your mind when you think of music. And when he thinks of music, the image of a treble clef comes to mind, which,
it's accurate, but it's not abstract. So I love that Troy goes, it's a start. I was like, okay, cool. So Riker calls Data to the bridge and off he goes. Now, we have a little bit of like a late captain's log to start the episode. And I was like, we haven't looked at Stardate for a while. So I was like, just for funsies' sake, it's Captain's Log Stardate 47615.2. The Enterprise has encountered a rogue comet in Sector 1156. It is not native to this region of space, and there is no previous record of the object in any Federation charts. And I was like, a couple of things came to mind, and I wonder if you noticed this. One, the external shot of the Enterprise running parallel to this big, beautiful, smoking comet.
Snowball in the world.
Yeah, it's like the world's biggest like gray snowball with like smoke coming off the back of it, like space dust. I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. And also, I love seeing the bridge where Picard is sitting like the sophisticate that he is, like with his legs crossed, and Riker is manspreading in his seat, and they're both kind of like talking in the background, and they both look so comfortable and settled in their roles. And I was like, this was just a nice, beautiful, peaceful bridge shot where it's like the Enterprise is a well-oiled machine by season 7. Everybody knows themselves, they know their roles, they know each other, and it's just another day at the office. And I just loved to see that. It was strangely comforting.
Yeah, really I loved the giant snowball. I thought it was so cool. I thought it looked amazing. That external shot, which again was like 10 seconds, was amazing. It was beautiful. I loved it. And I love the comet tail. Yeah. Like I love that.
Yes, like it was like, I can't even describe. It was like gray smoke, like sort of billowing slowly behind it. It looked like it was going really slow too. Like the comet didn't look like,
which is crazy because it is going fast because they travel so fast and they go so many distances. But but with this shot, it looked like it was going slow, which was amazing. And as they're kind of like scanning it and figuring out what this object is and how long it's been here, Data discovers that this object has been en route for 87 million years.
That's so cool.
Like, what? It's just been floating through space and hasn't hit anything that stopped it yet. It hasn't hit a planet. It hasn't hit any kind of other space debris that was big enough to stop it from continuing its motion. It's an object in motion, like staying in motion.
Right. Like no gravity to like bend its path or pull it in or destroy. Yeah. Very cool.
For millions of years. That's crazy.
87 million years. I mean, 87 million years ago, T-Rexes were still stomping around the world. That's to think that's how long this comet has been flying in its path. I was like, dang. So they said it appears to have come from the Darcy sector. And as Data scans the comet, this white light like bathes the bridge and the ship. And Data figures it must have been an intense sensor echo. So he compensates for it. And they keep doing the sensor sweep of the comet, which will be complete in 39 hours. And I thought, 39 hours to scan a comet? Is its core like solid lead? They can sweep an entire planet in like 22 seconds. 39 hours.
The other thing I thought too, I mean, I didn't make as big of a deal of it as you are making right now, rightfully so. But I did think about when they were in the episode The Pegasus, and they were scanning that entire quadrant and asteroids for the lost ship. Wasn't that whole thing going to be like 22 hours to scan like an entire asteroid belt? And every single asteroid in the asteroid belt.
Like hundreds of thousands of asteroids. And this one comet, this one snowball takes 39 hours. Like if that core is
and it's made out of mostly like ice. Like what?
Yeah. I was like, so it's just like dirty snow?
It's dirty snow. Like and if you eliminate the dirty snow components of the comet, I feel like that would tell you what else there is there to scan.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, spoiler alert, there is something really interesting in there, but
yeah, you're right. 39 hours is kind of unnecessarily.
Excuse me.
This should have been like 14 minutes.
Girl, unless that core was like solid unobtainium or some shit, there is no reason.
Well, if it had a lot of like isometric interference or whatever they always say, then it'd be like, there's radiation from in the middle. But they didn't say that. Not once did they say that.
They were just like, there's no chunk of ice and snow that's 87 million years old.
That's going to take some time.
39. It's going to.
You and I could investigate a piece of ice in about 1 second. So
looks like it's ice to me. I don't know. Just put a flashlight behind it. Oh no, there's something in the middle. Okay. Anyway, now Deanna and Beverly are like meeting up to go to Mukbara class, and Beverly's got the coolest gym bag ever. It's like this really shiny, kind of goldy sort of leather or something. It's really shiny. And I was like, ooh, very cool for 80s, very cool for 90s, very cool for today even. And they're sort of talking and they're like, oh, Worf is going to teach some Mukbara throwing techniques today. And Deanna's like, oh my God, more like falling techniques. Like the last time we did this, I couldn't walk for a week. And as she's grabbing her bag, Beverly kind of goes over to Troy's table and she's like, oh, there's like a stone carving, like a little pillar.
Very cool. Very cool little statue thing.
Like a little statue, yeah. And Beverly goes, gift from Will, and she's like, no, I've never seen it before, and it's not really Will's style.
Yeah, and it's not his style. Like he would have given her a Horgon or something.
Absolutely, he would have.
But yeah, and then she's like, Beverly's like, oh, a secret admirer, and Troy's like, oh, that's a thought. And here's where I was like, no, thank you.
In
like
my quarters?
That's it. Like secret admirer, love that. Popping into my room, my house when I'm gone, and then leaving little presents on the table gives serious stalker vibes. And I'm like, this is why we need locks on this ship.
Thank you.
Because
even if like the only way I could possibly not be creeped out by that is if like somebody I was dating wanted to be cheeky and did like a little site-to-site transport of that object like to my quarters, but they weren't actually in my quarter,
Right.
But I didn't think of that at all. Like when I saw this, I was just like, oh, cool. It's like this thing has appeared. And Deanna seems like not even remotely frightened. Yeah. She's like, someone was in my quarters. No.
I was like, hit the brakes. As soon as I heard that, I was like, nope, no, ma'am. Not entering my, because then I started thinking like, what if your underwear is disappearing and somebody's your secret admirer? Get out of here. Just all of it. I'm like, no.
I love
You're right. I didn't think about site-to-site transport. That was my second thought. My first thought was, who's coming in my room without my knowledge? My second thought was, let me check my underwear drawer, because this has stalker vibes. It really does.
All over it.
But the only way I would have been okay with it in Troy's position is if it was Will, because they have so much history.
Yeah.
Will could come in whenever. Like
he can drop off a little box of chocolates from me or something.
But literally anyone else on the ship, I'd be like, Picard was here. You know, I'd be like, anybody else, you'd be like, yeah, or maybe Beverly, because they're super close friends. But like anybody else, I'd be like, why were you in my
Barkley? What have I told you about coming into my quarters? Yeah, they dropped his ass off at Starbase 87.
Barkley.
Poor Barkley. We haven't seen him in a minute. He's been having his tail tucked between his legs and he's been giving some intensive therapy, I hope. Now, as they leave for Mokbara class, this strange symbol appears on the top of that little figurine. And it kind of looks like a little sun.
Mm-hmm.
And back in sculpting class, Data has made this incredible mask.
Oh,
and
so
he said
beautiful.
The image, he said the image of the mask just sort of popped into his mind. And Troy notices there's a little symbol on it, identical to the symbol that was on the little pillar in her quarters. So she's like, Data, have you been in my quarters? And he's like, no. And she's like, well, the symbol on the mask is the same as on the figure in my quarters. Are you sure you haven't been in my quarters? And he's like, no, counselor.
Yeah, she was very like, come on, like, tell the truth.
You've been there.
Which I actually admire that, because I would have been like, again, with my previous feelings, I'd have been like, what the F, Data? Like, why were you in my quarters would have been what I said.
Red alert. Shut it down. Shut down the whole classroom. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm putting your off switch right now until I get some answers.
And I know where it is because you've been telling the whole world.
But I appreciate that she was just like, wait, she's trying to get to the bottom of it, but she's not making any accusations, unlike I probably would. Yeah. And then he, like, of all people, like, if he's saying no, he didn't, he really didn't. He's not lying. He doesn't lie. He just says it like it is. He doesn't even know why he should lie. So she's like, okay, well, maybe, that's weird. But as she's kind of puzzling about it, that same little boy, Eric, is like, oh, counselor, can you help me with my terminal? It's not working. It's acting funny. And when they look over, there are all these cool little glyphs like floating around that kind of match the same theme as the mask and as the statue in Troy's room.
Very much so, yeah.
So then Troy and Data look at each other and they're like, uh-oh, I think this is a thing. Something's going on.
Something's going on, which I love how quickly. This is why communication is key. Because if Troy hadn't been in that classroom and Data was just busy making this really cool looking mask, and then the data pad or the terminal starts looking weird, nobody would have thought anything of it. But for Troy to see this symbol and then ask Data, so now Data's aware that a symbol's floating around, and now it's on the computer, then it's like, oh, okay. Now in main engineering, Data, Geordi, and Riker are investigating the symbols, and it looks to be some sort of alien information has been downloaded onto the computer core, and it seems to be completely reconfiguring the computer system. And Geordi has traced its path from the replicators to the sensor array, and Riker's like, sensors? We've been scanning that comet for the past 18 hours,
and we still don't know what's in it for some reason.
It's more ice. That's all that's in there, as far as we know, until we don't. And they're like, could we use the phasers to melt down the shell of that comet and figure out
if there's something inside? Yeah. Can we do it a faster way?
Yeah. And Geordi and Riker are discussing these options. Data says he recognizes the symbols that are floating around on the panel, but he's like, I don't know how I know this, but I do know that I recognize these symbols.
And I know what they mean. And Geordi's like, do you think your systems may have been affected too? Just like the ship's computer systems, which is kind of like, I love their friendship. And it's like when he said that, I was like, oh my gosh, it's one of the things you have to think of when you're best friends in Android. If the ship's computers are going haywire, maybe your best friend's computers are going haywire too, right? It's something you wouldn't think of for a human friend. You'd just be like, how do you recognize these? That's so weird. Did it come to you in a dream? Do you have a past life? Or I don't know what you would think.
Exactly.
But with Data, it's like, maybe your systems are also filling with these glyphs.
You were hit by the white light of the comet, so who knows? Yeah. And Data actually starts naming these symbols. He's like, companion, road, boundary, whatever. And the last one looks like the mask he made in class. And he says, this one is death. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. And then it goes to commercial break. And you're like, that was a good commercial break. Because at that step, you're just like, what? Death?
Yeah, at first it's like,
all the
weird.
other were
That's
very,
weird.
very like, boundary, companion. They seem benign.
Yeah,
but why
totally
the last one have to be
benign.
death and so gigantic? You're like,
it was like the biggest
good.
glyph. It's like, this is not good. So after a commercial break, they decide to hatch a plan to melt away the comet's shell, and it reveals this like really strange structure.
So
that's unlike anything we've ever seen before. It looks like a bunch of Legos have just been stuck together.
It looks like Lincoln Logs. I don't know if you ever had those, but
I remember Lincoln Logs.
It looks like Lincoln Logs. So for all of you who are too young, they're like Legos, but wood. It's weird. It's hard to describe.
You could build little log cabins with them, basically.
And that's pretty much it.
Back in the day, Cowboys and Indians was the game to play in like the 60s and 70s and even 80s, which is like not appropriate terminology at all anymore. But that was like that was the big game.
Yeah,
so a lot of like that was the thing. So a lot of like Western movies. That's why like in the 60s, like Hollywood was fucking obsessed with like Western movies, and even in the 70s. So those toys came out, and it's just logs that have little cutaways. So you can like stack them together and like make little log cabins. That's basically all you can make. You can just make like forts.
Yeah, but that's all. Cool. It was very cool. It was super fun. I mean, little kids like don't need much. It was super fun. And this reminded me totally of Lincoln Logs. And I was like, oh, that looks fun to make. Right. That was my first thought. And then my second thought was, wow, this is the least aerodynamic shape in the history of aerodynamic shapes. And it's been flying for 87 million years. Like if a culture launched this thing somehow, because it doesn't seem to have any propellants, it's just been floating, but something had to give it that initial push. And it's like, I mean, not that you need any aerodynamics in space because there's no air, but still people tend to build things in shapes that would pass through an atmosphere well. And I was kind of like, man, how did this thing come to be? Spoiler alert, we never find that out. But that's what I was thinking when I was watching. I was just like, I mean, you don't need to know. I was just curious looking at it, like really who made this and where did it come from and how did it get here and where is it going? Like it was very cool. So we see this super cool object.
It is almost completely solid, and it's composed of fortanium and several other unknown materials. And I was like, to be honest, guys, fortanium is also an unknown material because that's not a real fucking thing. But okay. Although
well, it's known to them.
I might be wrong because maybe it's on the periodic table, but I'm pretty sure it's not. I'm pretty sure I've spent many years staring at the periodic table for work. So like,
but this is the future. They have a bigger periodic table because they have elements from the whole universe, not just this planet. So the reason that it's important that this object is completely solid is because Picard's first question is it a ship? Which is kind of my question too. Because like, how did it?
What I thought, yeah.
How did it get there? Where's it go? Right, all those questions I just asked. But when Data says it's almost completely solid, then you're like, okay, well, I don't know what this thing is, but it's not a ship. Or if it's a ship, it's got only like a little pocket for somebody to control it. Like it's not meant for thousands and thousands of people. So what is this thing? What could this thing possibly be? So they're scanning and scanning, and Data intuitively knows what it is. He's like, I believe this is an archive of some kind that keeps information. And Geordi's like, come on, dude, there's no way you know that. There's no way from what we've just scanned and said, you cannot extrapolate that is what this is. And he's like, I know that, but at the same time, I also know I'm right. And Picard is like, Data, are you in communication with this object some way?
I thought that was such a great question. Do you believe yourself to be in communication with that object? Was such a great question.
Something I probably wouldn't have thought of. And it's just genius. Because you're like, how does he know?
You know what? When he said that question, I went, classic Picard, because I would not think to ask that either. But it is exactly the right question to ask. And he says
it also makes sense too, because in the past we've had telepathic organisms, we've had sentient sand
girl.
We've had a lot of different ways that other sentient creatures are trying to communicate to people on the ship. So it was a very reasonable question to be like, well, maybe this thing can communicate to you because you're artificial and it can't communicate to us. Yeah. So he's like, I don't know, but I'll run a level 1 diagnostic just to see what's going on with my brain, with my positronic net. And Picard's like, Geordi, Go help him with that. And Picard tells Worf, go ahead and sever this connection. The second the ship seems to be in any danger whatsoever, because somehow the object is still connected to the ship and it's still changing the ship systems one by one into these really, really cool looking glyphs.
Yeah, very cool looking glyphs. And we get this very cool exterior shot. The structure of this archive is humongous. It like dwarfs the Enterprise. I was like, dang. Riker goes to see Picard in the ready room, and these symbols and these glyphs and these little pillars are appearing everywhere. So Picard's ready room is like full of these glyphs and these, not
like
the glyphs,
statues.
but the little statues. And so Riker says that
which
they're all
means
the same.
Picard's like, just in his like happy place. I love that we get to see archaeology geeky Picard in this episode.
This is archaeology Picard 101 right here. I know this is a really great time for him to shine. And I thought it was really great storytelling that it's like, well, he already has this whole backstory of having love for archaeology. So he is the perfect person to like roll up his sleeves and jump right in. Riker says all of these little statues are the same. They're all primitive and useless. And I love Picard's inner archaeologist is coming out and he corrects Riker. He's like, only an extremely advanced civilization could have built that archive out there. And the stone artifacts might play just a ritualistic role in that society. And here's something that totally threw me off. While having this conversation with Riker, Picard is holding one of those stone pillars and he's holding it with one hand. And that pillar is probably like 14, 16 inches long and about 8 inches wide. Okay. If that really was stone, that thing would probably weigh like 40, 50 pounds.
Maybe it's made out of like volcanic stone.
Yeah. Like lava rock.
Weighs, like lava rock that weighs like 1 tenth of an ounce or whatever per pound or whatever.
Because I was like, if that thing was granite, you would need like 2 arms and a strong back to pick that thing up seriously. But I did think, how cool is it that you can make foam look like so realistically like stone? I did think that was cool, but I was like,
it looked 100% like stone.
Right
all
there.
of it looked like stone.
Yeah, you would never be able to just pick that. I was like, that thing would probably weigh 30 to 60 pounds easily. So no, but okay. But he does notice that compass symbol is appearing everywhere. And they're like, road, boundary, travel. These could all be symbolized by like a compass. It's possible, like.
And the object itself, the archive is moving. So there could be something with that. And Riker originally comes in to say, we've confined the system corruption so that it won't spread. So no more of our systems are going to be affected. But the little part that has been affected continues to be more and more affected. But everything else should be good. So that's when he's kind of like, what are these things? They're totally useless. And Picard's like, no, they're ritualistic. Like you said, they're ceremonial and they're deceptively simple. Like the fact that they're simple from such an advanced civilization means that this simplicity was purposeful. It was thoughtful. And I just loved seeing him geek out. I love seeing him like educate Riker and just being like, well, look at this and look at that and look at this symbol and this other symbol. I was totally into it. I
was too, because I also thought very primitive technology type stuff, but he was right. It's like only a very advanced society could have built that archive and launched it.
Yeah. So why do they have a bunch of stuff that's stone of all things?
Exactly. Of all things, right? In main engineering, meanwhile, this level 1 diagnostic is being run on Data. And
we get to see Data's head again. I love seeing his positronic net. It's so cool.
I love
it. Never gets old.
All of the shots except for the Data lore one where it was under the fingernail. And I was like, bleh,
the fingernail was awful. And I'll also say the last episode we did, Thine Own Self, when like his face was smashed, that was also pretty awful. Like just to see it like pretty rough, smashed and pulled and ripped. That was kind of gross. So those two will like hard pass, but every other time when they just gingerly tap the head and it opens up
or
and you
arm panel or something.
And you see like beep, 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 beep. It's so cool.
It's really cool. Now there's sort of a glitch that happens and Data says he has a curious sensation in his positronic net. And then he asks one of the most truly terrifying questions I've ever heard on Trek. Geordi, what does it feel like when a person is losing their mind? And I was like, oh my God. Unplug that shit right now. I don't care what's happening. Unplug it.
And that's exactly what Geordi does. I mean, first he goes, all right, Data, you're scaring me. Like, what's going on? And he's like, I don't know. And Geordi's just like, look, you're going to be okay. Okay. You are with me. Everything is going to be okay. I'm here. We're going to figure this out together. So beautiful. And then he's like, and we're unplugging this BS right now because I don't like this kind of talk. So he goes to he unplugs it. He goes back to the data pad to push a few buttons. And mere seconds later, he hears this weird sound. And he's like,
what noise?
Yeah. And he's like, what is that? He comes back to look and Data's positronic net has completely changed.
It's
and
like,
he's like
encased in this like plastic.
Yeah.
Almost looks like
amber.
Yeah, it almost looks like amber, or like extreme close-ups of like a cell where you see like cell walls all interconnecting, where I was like, what the hell?
Yeah, and all the connections are different. The lights are different. It looks like more primitive, but it still has like buttons. And so you're like, what is this? And so as he's looking, going, what the heck? Data turns his face really slowly towards Geordi, and all of a sudden he's got this huge tattoo on his forehead.
Yeah,
he's got
like a raised, like a raised symbol.
Yeah, like a welt, like a giant welt.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's a glyph on his forehead. And he also has another like stone glyph on his chest next to his comm badge. And he starts talking in this really weird voice. And Geordi's like, oh crap. And you're just like, and he turns and he says, Masaka is waking. And you're just like, oh man, like, especially when the moment before he just said, I feel like I'm losing my mind. And now his body has transformed, his voice has transformed, his personality has transformed.
100%.
And of all people to transform, it's Data, the strongest person on the entire ship, who can also like mimic everyone's voice.
Hard pass.
It's like rut-row. So in the next scene, we see Data sitting on top of the warp core, and there's security in there, and Geordi is just like beside himself. I mean, really, he's just standing there. But in my projection, he's totally beside himself and worried about his friend.
Is acting crazy.
Yes. Yeah. And Picard is like, let's go ahead and get Counselor Troy in here, which is amazing because he sees this as a psychological. I mean, obviously it's a technological issue, obviously, but it's also a psychological issue, obviously. So I love that he calls Counselor Troy. He's not like, Worf, get in here, get us a bigger, stronger phaser. It's like, Troy, get in here. Something's going on with Data, and this is definitely a different personality. We need a counselor's touch.
Totally. Now, I love that when he comes in. I love when Picard comes into main engineering. Data is sitting on the warp core, like on the dilithium crystal chamber on top, and I thought that was really cool. And yeah, once like Troy walks in, he immediately like falls down and he's like, Masaka, right? Like he's immediately this.
He falls down to worship.
Yeah, he really does.
But he falls down as one person who he's told Picard his name is Ehot. Yeah, so he's fallen down as Ehot. But as soon as he lifts his head to look at Troy, he starts talking in a totally different voice. And he's like, different voice. I worship you. Every part of me is for you, and also their stuff. And Troy's like, because mind you, Picard just said Counselor Troy to engineering. That was all the information she had. She didn't know Data was losing it in here. She didn't know there was different. She didn't know what was going on. So she just walks in and she's looking like, what the F is going on right now? And that's when Picard goes, I think we'd better confine him to his quarters. And I put in my notes, ... Good luck with that. Not even remembering the part later where he just leaves his quarters. But I was just like, how are you going to do that, buddy? How are we going to do that?
Yeah, thank you. Because as Ehot is kind of, sort of reminds me
like a
of
trickster.
He reminds me of like Peeves the Poltergeist from Harry Potter.
I thought you were going to say Q, because he did the Q lean on the panel. But you're right. No, he does. He is like Peeves.
He gives me Peeves the Poltergeist vibes because he's just sort of there to be this like troublemaker, and he's so strong. So if he doesn't want to go to his quarters, what are you going to do? But they didn't really worry about that because
he wasn't
he was,
Ehot.
Like, in his quarters. Yeah.
He wasn't Ehot in that moment. He was this guy who was worshiping Troy, and that guy seemed a lot more companionable. He
totally did.
When they picked him up, he was like, cool. When they walked him away, he was fine by it. So
he really
good thing, because but you're absolutely right. Like Ehot, if they were like, go to your quarters, and he's like, no, they're gonna be like, what are you gonna do now? Okay, well, then just
let us know when you decide to go. Yeah. Now it's what I like to call Elcar's panel time. There's this beautiful display that Geordi is walking us through in the observation lounge as we're trying to figure out what the F is happening to Data. He's got these 14 new behavioral nodes in Data's positronic brain, and Geordi thinks that the archive is using Data to create different people within that culture. And as a result, Data's real personality is getting buried. And Troy says he has the android version of multiple personality disorder, which of course, me being me, Shereese, I had to do a deep dive on this.
And what'd you find?
Now, multiple personality disorder is a very outdated term for what this disorder is. The more up-to-date term is called dissociative identity disorder, and it's associated with an overwhelming experience or traumatic events or abuse that occurred in childhood. And symptoms of dissociative identity disorder include the existence of two or more distinct identities or like personality states. The distinct identities are accompanied by changes in behavior, memory, thinking. You might have ongoing gaps in memory about everyday events or personal information and or past traumatic events. The symptoms understandably cause significant distress or problems in social or occupational settings or other areas where you need to function. The attitude and personal preferences of a person with this identity disorder may suddenly shift and then shift back. So, for example, you have different favorite foods or different favorite activities or different clothes and things that you wear, and then all of a sudden you hate that food. The shift in identities happens involuntarily, are unwanted, and cause a huge amount of distress for the patient, which all of this sounds absolutely horrific. People with dissociative identity disorder may feel that they have suddenly become an observer in their own speech and actions. They may feel like they have out-of-body experiences, like they're watching their bodies do things. Or their bodies may feel different. Like your body feels like you're trapped inside the body of a small child, or your body might feel like really big and muscular, but that's not what your body looks like. So that's actually really interesting to think that feels like your body is changing as well. So yeah, all of this there is medication that can help with that, and like lots and lots of like treatment and therapy. But gosh, for people that have dissociative identity disorder, that just sounds absolutely exhausting and scary and horrible. That sounds horrible.
It sounds horrible. And it's something we talk about. We've talked about from time to time on the show, but you and I have talked about a lot in our lives as friends, that the mind is really incredible and really powerful and can do amazing things. And it has this side of it that can be fragile. Like when it's broken, when it's shattered, it can't easily be put back together, or sometimes ever put back together. It's not like a broken bone where you set it, or a missing limb where you have a prosthetic. It's like once it's damaged to a point of no return, there's no return. And it makes it hard for you to live the rest of your life because there's something that you cannot consciously control because your mind is doing whatever your mind is doing. So yeah, it's totally terrifying. And I think that's shown really well in this episode, where data's shifting from personality to personality. Now, the thing that is different, even though I don't know if it's known exactly the types of stressors or triggers that can cause a personality shift with someone who's suffering from DID. But I will say, for the ease of this episode, the shifts happen frequently, like very, very frequently, because the show is only 42 minutes long. So we have to see him go through like a bunch of changes, a bunch of personalities, like, and kind of in a cycle over and over and over, just for time's sake. So after this first shift into EHOT, we don't see Data anymore. Like, he doesn't come back.
Nope.
It's not like there's two personalities. There's Data's personality and this other guy. It's like Data's gone and there's just this other guy. And when Picard goes to, and then we see this worshiper guy when Troy comes in, and we're like, okay, well, there's two guys. And then when Picard comes into Data's quarters later to talk with him, it's like another guy. And you're like, oh my gosh. So there's all these different personalities.
People are there. Yeah.
Exactly. And where's Data? How many are there? And where's Data?
Yeah. Yeah. Where's our friend? Now, EHOT does tell Picard when he comes to speak with him that Masaka is EHOT's queen. He says she's lazy, spends most of her time sleeping. It's what she does when she's awake that you should worry about. And Picard is like, so we should try to keep her asleep then? And EHOT says only Corgano can do that, and he's not here. So as EHOT is about to tell Picard, like, who the fuck Corgano is or where he is, Data shifts into another character, one who's like,
a terrified child or something.
Yes. And the archive has activated some sort of transport beam, and now the ship can't break it off. So there's an energy pulse coming through the tractor beam that's overriding their control systems. And so now it's like, now not only do we have this terrifying thing happening with Data, and Data is a link to what's happening to the ship, but now the archive is starting to, like, in its own way, like, attack the ship, where you're like, oh my God, we can't even break off communication with it.
Now the ship is in danger. And so Picard's like, all right, I'm on my way to figure this out. And Data grabs Picard as this terrified child, grabs his wrist and holds him really tightly and is like, no, don't leave me alone.
Crushing the shit out of his wrist.
Exactly. Data's saying, like, please don't leave me, like any terrified child would say, but with the strength of an android. And so you just hear Picard like, please let go, stop. Like, he's in so much pain.
Hurts. Yeah.
And then thankfully, he lets go. And I think Data shifts again to EHOT. And he's like, now, he goes, now, Captain, you've done it. Masaka's awake. And you're like, oh, crap. Now, what does this mean? So, but he does let him go. And so Picard's able to kind of leave. But you're like, oh, Data's not He's not in a good way. And Picard can't get any answers, and now the ship is definitely in danger. So
and trying to get answers too while Data is shifting from one personality type to another. You're like, damn it, just stay as Ehot,
right,
or as the old guy long
just
enough.
Be one person. Yes,
be one person. So we need this information. Yes, I did love seeing the like red alert version. It's like super cool to see the hallways all like dark and it's only red light flashing. Which, by the way, if you ask your listening device if you have one. I don't want to activate it right now in case you're driving or whatever, but ALEXA, you can say ALEXA red alert, and it's already programmed in your device to like, I have smart bulbs in my house. So it turns all the lights in my house red and it goes, wah, wah. So I was like, ooh, that's cool. I had that going while I was watching the episode because I felt like immersed. It's really fun. But my house wasn't turning into an archive. So, that was that. But Worf and his team.
Well, on that note, though, okay, so yes, that is fun and you should do it. If you have a listening device that's capable, you should do that. But what I will say about the kind of like the sets and that lighting is I feel like this episode was very simple with some of its special effects. For example, they just had a bright white light pass over the bridge crew, and that was a scanning beam. And we were all like, yep, totally a scanning beam.
Totally tracks.
Like that tracks. And then when they go into 10 forward, they have kind of like some steps, and it looks like a little maybe stage is being set up. And basically they just took a bunch of palm fronds and random branches and just threw them on the ground. But they made all the lighting really dark and creepy. And you're like, yeah, that does look like a cave. Like it just, I don't know. It's like the most simple decorations, and it really worked.
That is the key. Okay. So me, I really love the holidays. I love Halloween. Yeah. I have a lot of fun with it. I decorate my house. When I'm busy putting my haunted house together, I've got all the lights on so I can see what I'm doing. It doesn't look remotely scary, but you turn the lights off and suddenly it's terrifying, right? Like you change the lighting to like dark red and suddenly the haunted house is really scary, which is like just the power of setting a scene because it tells such a story. At the end of the night, or imagine you're at the Haunted Mansion ride at Disneyland and it breaks down. They got to turn on all the lights. Everybody can see where they're going so they can step out and like make their way to the emergency exit. So it's not scary anymore. I was like, aw. But anyway, so yeah, you're right. They did the lighting really well. They sold the whole scene really well. So stone pillars and palm fronds all over 10 forward. And there are symbols of Masaka on top of all of the pillars. And Picard now understands that is the queen of death. And of course, deep diver that I am, I started going down this rabbit hole of like different goddesses of death, but there's so many from such a myriad cultures. It would have taken ages to explain, and my knowledge on such matters is absolutely zero, so I would not have done them justice. So I was like, let's just say there are many from dating from way back to the beginning of time. And that's
basically what Picard said, and that was enough for me. That's all I need to know. There are many. Cool.
I looked at like at first I looked at like ancient Greek and Roman mythology, and then I looked at ancient Egyptian mythology and like Mesopotamian mythology. And then I was like, oh my God, this podcast is gonna be like 10 hours long if I go all of these. And I don't know enough to like do them justice. Did you notice they started noticing that little U-shaped symbol that was like kind of small and insignificant, much like an afterthought?
Yeah, like, Picard had noticed it back in the ready room and was like, wow, this small symbol seems to just kind of be stuck in the back randomly.
Yeah.
When he's here and sees this big death symbol, this big Masaka symbol, he's like, wait, there it is again. And now he's like, okay, so now we're seeing repetition of these two symbols, but we really don't know at this point what the heck that's about. But what we do know is that this is the point where the ship is now in danger. So Picard's like, all right, Worf, go ahead and wrap this bad boy up. Sever the beam, like get rid of it. And Worf was like, oh, we've had trouble with XYZ. And Picard's like, just destroy it. Just destroy the entire archive because you can't have the ship being in any more danger. So he's like, all right, him and Geordi are going to go and try to figure out how to like destroy they have to like manually take a torpedo because something with the phaser bay or who knows what. And so they're going to destroy it.
Yeah. They've been locked out of weapon controls, which I wrote awesome. But they're like, they can manually program a photon torpedo. Also, girl, did you notice that they said part of deck 12 is now an aqueduct? And I was like, that's cool. I would have loved to have seen that.
They did. And I thought the same thing. I was like, but what is it? I want to see. Though? Where's the water going from and where's it going to? Like,
exactly.
Because that's what an aqueduct
and at what point does it disappear? And then also later in the episode, they have to meet on the bridge because the observation lounge has become a swamp. And I was like, again, great storytelling. And you don't have to waste any of your budget on building it because now in our minds, we're totally seeing it. And it's perfect.
Yes.
Now,
but they do have lots of really cool big sets in this episode. But the fact that they could just say it's now a swamp. They could just throw some palm fronds on the bridge and a statue. And we're like, wow, like, I don't know. It totally
different.
It totally worked for me.
Right.
So Picard's like, you know what? I really regret to Troy, because as Worf and Geordi go off to try to destroy this thing, because I really regret missing the opportunity to learn more about what this is and what's going on.
Picard.
Yeah. His little archaeologist heart is like kind of sad that this thing, this archive that's been floating around for 87 million years is about to turn into dust, which I think is sad. But also, if it's me or if it's you, it's going to be you, right? Like if it's like the whole ship and the crew and their safety versus this really ancient archive, the archive is going to be toast. So
no. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Immediately. And so in engineering, they're kind of working on the torpedo, and, they're doing their final checks before they send it off. And then Worf is like, wait, the power just suddenly went away. Like it's gone. And Geordi's like, what? Why? It was just working a second ago. So they go and kind of tinker on it. Geordi opens a panel and snakes start crawling out of it.
Girl, we've got snakes on a starship. I had completely forgotten about this because I hadn't watched this episode since I was like a kid. I was like, there's live snakes. Why does Worf and Geordi, both of them don't look even remotely like alarmed or like, oh my God, we got to do something. They're like, that's weird. Live poisonous snakes. How did that get there?
Well,
I was like,
even
guys,
I don't know if,
like 20 steps back. Come on.
I don't know if they were poisonous, and I would not know if I opened a panel and there were freaking snakes in it. I would freak
on
out.
A plane, girl. Yep.
Yeah, and like, how would they know? And anyway, I mean, Geordi just he does hop back because it was a surprise, but they do it the typical Starfleet, like, how interesting. They do that typical weird. Like non-response, and then they're like, and then they turn around and the other parts of the engineering is starting to be transformed. And Geordi goes, you know what? I think we better get out of here. I would have said that at the snakes. We don't need to see anything else.
No.
Let's
Nothing
get on out of here.
Also, why the F are you guys tinkering with a live photon torpedo in main engineering right next to the warp core? Right next to the warp core.
Is this where we keep torpedoes? Do we keep them here?
You could have done this in like a cargo bay or something in case the torpedo like has like a hairline fracture in its wall or something. Threatens to explode. You could put like a force field around it or jettison it or something. Like, no, let's just do it inside the warp core in case something happens. Are you guys serious with this? And you're not running away from snakes? Come on.
We need some retraining. You know what? I did think about that, but yeah, manually handling a torpedo 3 feet away from the warp core is not the best call. Let's go ahead and put that in a cargo bay. Let's put it in a cargo bay at the back of the ship where if it blows up, we don't even care.
Yeah, like you just lose like some cargo and shit. Like it's fine. It's not that big a deal. No, I feel like this should have been Starfleet Protocol 101. You can't even have hot chocolate in the engineering area. You're telling me you're gonna have a photon torpedo that's live. Okay, I'm done with that. I was like, this is so dumb. So yeah, Geordi and Worf are now trying. They're like literally not panicking about the snakes at all. They're like, I would say they were marveling at them, but they were not panicking like normal people.
Yeah.
And then now part of main engineering has turned into the stones and branches, and the panel in the back is just a giant Masaka. And as they investigate and continue to not freak out about snakes being loose, Geordi's like, we better get out of here. And they try to leave. But then this like fire just springs out from nowhere. And thank God Worf is cool about it because he's like, emergency transport 2 to beam up. Boom, we're out of here.
I actually thought that the transporter was not going to work. And they're going to have to like crawl through a Jeffries tube. I was like,
like a smoky one at that.
Or who knows what? Maybe there's snakes in there too. Or like a freaking rhino or who knows what stuff is just
suddenly
popping
it's
up.
Jumanji.
Yeah. That's what I was waiting for. I was waiting to hear the drums. But no, the transporter worked and they beamed out. And I was like, wow, that was a smart move. And I was also like, where are their fire suppression systems? But that's been transformed into like freaking branches and vines or whatever. Yes. And I'm like, oh my gosh, let's get out of here.
What we have learned about this archive system is that it is not beaming these things onto the ship. It is rearranging the molecular structures of things that are already on the ship into these structures that it wants to make, including live stuff. So it is taking like live cells and DNA and just changing them to become
and plants,
making snakes and making palm leaves. And I was
Isn't
like,
that the coolest thing you've ever heard? Like, what? It's just transforming matter?
It's not a transporter, it's a transformer. It's very, very cool. It
Amazing.
Just transforms whatever you've got already. Yeah, I was like, this is cool. Now on the bridge, which is partially filled with stones and branches, this is when Riker's like, oh, we better talk out here because the observation lounge is currently a swamp. And I love that he said currently a swamp. It's currently a swamp. We got to talk out here. Mm-hmm. I was like, okay. Turns out about 20% of the ship has been turned into like this temple or this archive or whatever. Yeah. And this is when Beverly is like, oh, even like the living material is being transformed into other living material. And Picard
thankfully,
is like,
the humans are not affected. And thankfully, life support is not affected at all. So I'm like, oh, that was nice. I'm glad they said that, because that would have definitely been a big question in my mind. Every time there's some random thing jumping off in the ship, I'm always like, oh man, I hope it doesn't hit the warp core or something like that. So I like that
so let's not forget we are flying around in the vacuum of space, and if something happens to rupture our hull, we're all toast. All of us.
Well, we're all
terrible.
Ice. Yeah. Bad news.
Yeah, we're all icicles. Yeah.
Bad news. So thankfully life support's fine, and it's not affecting any humans. It's just affecting all their stuff. So they're like, okay. And so Geordi's like, well, it is a program of some sort that's, you know, rewriting our stuff. So maybe I can find the transformation part of the program and then just turn it off. And then Picard's like, all right, cool. You do that. I'm going to try to talk to Masaka, because I think that is actually the key. She is the key to this whole thing, because the view screen in the bridge has just become a giant Masaka symbol. So he's like, I think
they can't even see out the window anymore. It's just Masaka.
There probably is no window anymore. It's just a big Masaka screen. So back in Data's quarters, Data has now turned into yet another personality. And this time he's an old man who's warming himself by the fire. And you know what? Hats off to Brent Spiner, because I totally felt like this was an old man who was really cold. Like I felt like that watching him curl up next to this tiny little flame. And the way he was talking and acting, I was like, yeah, that's an old man who's cold. Like,
girl,
he nailed it.
Not only is he impressive AF in this role, I have some trivia that makes this even more impressive. Turns out that Brent Spiner found this episode to be one of his most difficult acting assignments on the series. And there are some reasons. One, and I'm just going to read from my captain's log, the unauthorized complete Trek voyages. Brent Spiner said, quote, I had some good stuff 7th season. I just wish they had been scheduled differently. I got the script for Masks on the night before we shot it and had just finished filming Thine Own Self the midnight before. So he had like a couple of
data
hours.
Heavy episodes.
Yeah, he had just a couple of hours to be like, now I have to be like multiple personalities like in this. Oh my gosh. So he said, I didn't have time to even absorb the script and digest it and figure out who these people were that I was playing. I think I said to Jerry Taylor at the time, give me 6 months and I could give all the characters their due. But as it was, I didn't know who these people were. So I was doing instant acting and just coming up with whatever I was coming up with because we had to put it on film because of filming schedule, end quote. And I was like, dang. So the midnight before he shot this episode, he had just finished filming Thine Own Self, which was last week's episode when he's like the Iceman down on that planet. And it's
which is like 99% Data. That whole episode was him. That whole episode was him figuring out a new personality and character and attitudes and a whole giant script, a million bazillion lines. So this sounds exhausting. Yeah.
Hats off to him times 100. Yeah.
I will also second that I wish they had done that differently. That sounds like a lot, but he did an amazing job. Like I couldn't tell. Every character seemed totally different to me. He did a different, he did different like body language, like it
different movements.
Yeah. So it turns out this old guy is Masaka's father, which is so interesting because I forgot that part. I thought he was just some random old guy, just like Ehot was just some random other guy. But he's like, yeah, you know, she's my daughter and children don't listen to their parents and blah, blah, blah. And he reiterates that only Corgano can actually talk to her. Like he can't talk to her at all. And as Picard's asking, like, tell me about Corgano. How do I find him? Where is he? Of course, the old man goes away. Ehot comes back. And he's like, Corgano's not chasing her anymore. And he doesn't want to answer any questions about Corgano or Masaka or anything because he's afraid for his life. And Picard is like, please, for the love of all things good, please help me. And Ehot's like, I escaped and I don't want to end up on her sacrificial slab. And Picard's like, I will offer myself in your place. I will be on the sacrificial slab. I just need to talk to her. So Ehot's like, you pinky swear? And he's like, pinky swear. He's like, cool. Okay, fine. Here's what you need to do. If you build Masaka's temple, that's going to get her attention. However, it's also going to piss her off. And she loves killing people and letting them die of thirst and burning them alive. And just that's what you're
dying of thirst is just, my God.
It's brutal. It's brutal.
Yeah.
Burning alive, it's brutal, right?
No, so you're like, these are terrible ways.
Yeah, you're like, I don't know if I want to meet Masaka.
She's a little rageful. Yeah, she seems a little wrathful. You know what I'm saying?
A little
Old Testament. She seems a little Old Testament-y to me, a whole, 40 days and nights of flood shit. Like, it seemed a little lot, But Picard does volunteer himself. And Ehud tells Picard that he must build Masaka's temple. And so he starts to give Picard the sign of the temple. But halfway through that, he's like, Masaka, she's found me. And then the old man appears again. It's like, oh, damn. I need you to stay in one.
Yeah. So we know that Ehud just got murdered by Masaka.
He really did.
Like, dang it. And he was just about to tell us the symbol. And Picard couldn't take his place and keep his promise because it all happened in your mind. So
yep.
That's just,
you can't even do anything about that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really sad.
The old man, Ehud kind of started giving him, he's like, the line that is the never ending horizon, the curve that is the, oh shit, she's found me, So then Picard's like, okay, old man, I need you to give me this. And the old man is Brent Spiner, holy shit. He just does an old man so well. Like, that's tired and weary and not totally in this world anymore.
What's going on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so he's like, it doesn't matter anyway. And he's like, okay, the line that is the never ending horizon. What else? Come on. And he finally does get the sign for Masaka's temple. I will say this. This episode came out in 1994. I saw it when it first came out. I was in 7th grade. And I loved the idea of a symbol so much that when I was in class, like that following day or week or whatever, I was like in homeroom class and I doodled a little symbol. And I kept that symbol and I use it still to this day. So when I do ceramics and pottery, I will scratch that symbol on the bottom instead of writing my name. So at the pottery studio, when they see that symbol, they know that that's my work. And I'm like,
is the symbol of Masaka's temple? Or it was a symbol that you designed being inspired by Masaka's temple?
Inspired by Masaka's temple. So it is very much a glyph in that style. But it was like, I just kind of let my hand do whatever it wanted to do on paper. And the first version, I was like, that's it right there. That's perfect. I love it. Doesn't look anything like my name. Nothing at all. And I did not know this. And this was completely by accident, but I was showing an old friend of mine, like in high school, this little symbol. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember if it was a boy or a girl, but they were sitting like on the other side of the table from me. So they saw the upside down version of it. And they were like, oh, it's your initials. And I was like, no, it's not. And when I flipped it around, it does spell my 2 initials.
Wow.
Which I was like, wow,
so you spelled upside down.
I did. I spelled my upside down initials, but with like some extra like lines and stuff. Mm-hmm. But I was like, oh, I totally did that by accident, but I'm going to go ahead and pretend that I did that on purpose, but it was by accident. But still, I still to this day will like, sometimes I'll like on my students' work, I'll put a little symbol in the corner just to be like, it's a symbol that only I know that's like, tells me like, you've already checked this over. So it's like good to go. But total. Thank you, Masaka. Thank you, Masks.
The one good thing Masaka ever did in her life.
Yeah. So I do have bowls and cups and plates in my house that have that symbol on the bottom because I eat off the plates that I have made in ceramics, which I love.
I love that. So now that Picard has the sign is complete. The second it's completed, the old man turns back into the terrified child. And you're like, phew, good timing. Because if that would have been like 1 second longer for him to give you the whole glyph, you might have missed the dot or the last line or something and then got the totally wrong glyph. So next scene, we're back in the bridge. Geordi has figured out the archive's transformation program and he knows how to key in symbols. It's already set to accept symbols. Like it's set like that. So he's like, all I have to do is insert the symbol that you have here and that should create the temple. And Troy is like, but should we trust anything that you've heard from Data's different personalities? It seems kind of like a bad call. And Picard's like, look, I love this. He's like, Ehud died to give me that information. Like, we know that this is a personality in Data's mind, but we also know this personality is no more. Right? It has been destroyed. So he's like, a person has died to give me this information, so I'm going to trust it. And so very Star Wars too. Like many Bothans died to bring us this information. Yes, yeah.
Right. And it's like, you better plug it in and use it and hope it
works.
Turns something. Yeah.
And he also was kind of like, well, what other choice do we have? Right. And it's like, we have no other choice. So they're like, okay, fine, let's do it. So they go somewhere and somehow Geordi is able to make sure this transformation happens on a very specific part of the ship.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know how he figured that out, but okay, fine.
Which beforehand, it was just random, but like, yay, because we don't want, again, the warp core turning into anything. We want it to just stay the warp core.
Yep.
So they're in this hallway kind of like, it looks like they're outside of the holodecks or something. And then Picard comes over and he's like, okay, it's Picard, Troy, and Worf. And he comes over to Geordi in the bridge and is like, all right, we're ready. Go ahead and hit the transformation button. And then when he hits it, the hallways disappear and it becomes this beautiful temple. I was like, whoa, I've never seen that before in the show.
Like the blue streaky lights. I was like, ooh.
That was so cool.
It looks so cool.
And that totally still holds. Now we see this really big temple. And Picard says, okay, Masaka should show herself in some kind of way. Data didn't specify how or when or whatever, but in the meantime, let's just look around and see what we can see. And he notices that little half moon shape, or that little half circle shape is next to the Masaka shape. And he's like, this is my first time seeing these two symbols connected. And as he looks around the throne, they're repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated. So he's like, oh, okay, so there's something significant about these two things and about them being connected. And as they kind of puzzle through it, they collectively figure out that it looks like that little piece is chasing the bigger piece. And they're like, oh, maybe this is Corgano, because it looks kind of like, I mean, it's always behind it. It's always smaller. So maybe it means it's further away. And it's like chasing.
Except for like one where they have like a big giant one all by itself. And then, or no, it was like the Masaka symbol was like smaller and behind it. And it's like, it's the only time we see it like switched. Now, while they're figuring this out, in his quarters, Data looks like he's in a meditative trance, and then suddenly opens his eyes, gets up, sees the mask that he made, pops it on, leaves his quarters, and biffs the shit out of the two guards like that are in front of the quarters, like with zero effort. And this again is why it's so dangerous to have somebody like Data running loose when his programming is going haywire, because they're like, oh my gosh. Now they sort of figure out, now while this is happening and he's making his way to the temple, Worf and Troy and Picard sort of piece together that Masaka is like the sun and Corgano is likely the moon. So they're
so they
like
are
hunting
chasing
each other.
But
they are chasing each other.
Yeah, but it seems like Masaka has been in charge for a really long time. And if Masaka's the sun, then everything that Ihat said makes sense, that she leaves people to die of thirst, that she burns people to death, right? Because she's the sun. And a world with
I didn't put those together. You're so right. That's exactly what the sun does.
Exactly. Everything they were describing is what the sun does. And the sun, a world with only sun, a world with no shadow, no moon, no break would be like this. It would be ridiculously hot. It would be like impossible to live on. And so they discover that and they're like, oh, so they really are chasing each other. And Troy says, just like the sun and the moon, only one can be in ascendance at a time. Only one can be in the sky for the whole day. And then there's like a short transition period where they kind of switch places. Then the other one's in the sky. So they're like, okay. So Picard's like, all right, so we need to find Corgano so they can switch. Like maybe Corgano can like talk her down or control her or something so they can kind of switch. Now, while they're doing this, the whole ship shakes. And they're like, what the heck? And they turn and Data's suddenly sitting on the throne with the mask. And Picard immediately recognizes that that's Masaka and sitting so like queenly and stately on the throne.
Like with a broad, straight back. Absolutely chin in the air. And Picard is like, Masaka, I'm Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Like, she doesn't have time for this and doesn't want to hear it. She's like, I will not hear you.
He's doing his normal diplomat thing. Yeah. And she's having none of it. She won't hear anything. She's having none of it.
You know what I love is that Worf says she is not even listening. And I love that he said she. Love it. Because he didn't say he's not listening because Data identifies as male. He didn't say Masaka is listening. I love that even Worf, who comes from a very like culture, is very much like, no, this is a woman personality that's being expressed by Data right now. And so Picard says, well, then we might have to find someone she will listen to. And so they go back to the bridge and Geordi accesses the information symbol of Corgano and they have to try to initiate the transformation because they're like, well, everybody's like, are you sure you want to do that? You might like unleash like Masaka 2.0, but even Picard
everyone's
is like,
saying this is a terrible plan, Picard. Like you don't even know what this is. At least with Masaka, we knew we were making Masaka's temple. Like we knew that. With Corgano, we don't know what we're making. And Troy's like, this could be Corgano's temple. This could be Corgano himself. This could be anything. And Picard's like, Worf, how much time do we have? And he says about 2 hours before the entire Enterprise is gone. So then Picard's like, all righty then, go ahead and ring it up, Geordi. Yep. Yeah. like we've got no other options. And thankfully, it's just a mask. So it's like, oh just gosh, a mask. That's so great. That's just a mask, because it could have been absolutely anything.
It could have been anything. And I love what Picard says. He's like, We may have been going about this all the wrong way. This is a very ritualistic culture, one based on symbol and myth. Perhaps we should try to confront them on those terms. And I was like, Picard, you magnificent bastard. You've done it again. Like, look at you go. He's like, let me just go pop on my backpack that turns into a shovel, and I'll meet you in Masaka's temple. Like,
my backpack that has nothing in it but a shovel.
Yeah.
No provisions, no water, nothing to sleep with. No, which is just one shovel.
One shovel.
Yeah. That shovel was cool, but like, come on, you need some more stuff in your survival
pack. Your entire
pack.
backpack turns into the shovel, so you don't have to carry anything after. It's not like a case with a shovel, which I thought was kind of smart. But yeah, no. But here he goes. So less than 2 hours to go. He goes to give it a try. So in the temple, he speaks to Masaka as Corgano. And I thought that this exchange was really cool. Because they were like, you don't know enough about this culture. He's like, well, I know enough about enough cultures where like I'm gonna have to just kind of wing it. And he does a great job where he's like, Masaka's like, you haven't been chasing me for a while. And he's like, I know you too well. You must be so tired. You can never outrun me. He was saying all the right things. And Masaka was like, Corgano, it is good to have you back. I was like, thank God, because one step out of line and she will burn your ass to death.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. And Picard's just like, aren't you tired? Aren't you tired of, being pursued? And don't you want the fun of being the hunter again? Don't you want to experience, like, just playing on every single note? And Masaka's like, you're right. I'm feeling sleepy already. You always do that to me. And just sits down and is like, yeah, I think I will rest. I'll give it all a break because
so the hunt can start tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly.
And the hunt can start again, something like that. Yeah,
exactly. And so then Data kind of nods off and falls asleep. And a few seconds later, absolutely everything disappears and goes back to normal. And Data's standing there completely confused. Like he's also gone back to normal. His forehead's back to normal. His uniform's back to normal. The mask is gone, which by the way, the mask should not have been gone. But the mask was gone.
Because he made that mask. Yeah,
because he made that mask and he shows it in literally the next scene. And you're like, but where? Well, anywho, I just said, let's pretend it's on the ground. And they just didn't see it when they walked away. Maybe he just has it in his hand. I don't know. That's what I thought. And they walk away and his hands are empty. And I was like, oh, come on, guys. Missed opportunity. So anyways, so he's back to normal and he's just like, oh, how did I get here? And he goes, Captain, have I been dreaming again? Because he's like, has no idea what's happened, where he's been. So he's like, oh, but I know what this is. This is probably just like a waking dream. And I've been walking around, sleepwalking again. And Picard's like, it's been so much more than that, but I'm going to have to fill you in later, Later, and Dave's like, okay, cool. Do. And then I think Geordi or somebody comes over and is like, hey, Captain, everything's back to normal. Like, we're good.
I don't know what you did, but everything's good now. Yeah.
This was the ultimate like magic wand.
It really was like all's well that ends well. And, Data is kind of talking about the experience later with Picard in the ready room and Picard to say like, Data, you may not be human, but you have been an entire civilization, because Data does say like, it wasn't just a handful of personalities. There were thousands, possibly more inside there that probably would have like come out more and more and more.
If there's more time. Yeah.
Yeah. And I did love the mythical components of it. So Ehot does tell Picard that Masaka used her father's bones to build the first temple to herself. And I thought this is such a cool play on like so much mythology. Because like, Greek mythology I love, but like Zeus was born of Cronus, who like ate all of his children because he heard a prophecy that his children overthrown one day. So like every time his wife had a baby, he would just swallow it real quick. And all the unborn babies were just like in his stomach, just like waiting to be, and they like hatch a plan and like take Cronus down and like cut open his stomach, and all the children sprung forth like fully grown as adults. And those were like the 12 Olympian gods or whatever. So it's like very, very abstract ideas. Like I broke all your bones and made a temple to myself, but somehow you're also like still alive as my father. Like I just loved that like mythical component of it. Loved it.
And this is how it differs a lot from Inner Light, because he's experiencing an entire culture, but he's experiencing the mythos of the culture.
Yes.
Which seems like was like the central part of this culture. Like it was the most important thing about this culture. So he's experiencing this culture in a totally different way from like, oh, we got to water the plants, oh, I'm getting married. Like it's a totally different experience. It's so interesting. And we also, and he says too, he's like, I'm relieved to be free of those people, of those personalities. He says, but I also now feel empty, because he was like he was holding a whole civilization inside of him. And now he's just one voice. He's just one person with one set of thoughts. And I can imagine it'd be pretty like reverse culture shock, right? It'd be pretty shocking to have all these personalities and pretty shocking to have none all of a sudden.
Yeah, just
we
have
also,
one.
or to have one personality, none of these extras. And we also find out that Geordi was able to disable the transformation program after it shut down. So that way anybody else flying past here, their ship won't be converted. And they've dispatched some Starfleet scientists to keep studying the archive. So the archive didn't have to be destroyed. We don't have a where is it now, but you better believe some part of it is in the Daystrom Institute right this minute, living its best life.
With it's being looked at by top men. Okay, very Indiana Jones. That's like I just see it like in a crate somewhere
in a warehouse full of crates.
Stack, on a warehouse full of crates. Yeah, exactly. Like crated up everywhere.
Yeah, but this was amazing. This was really amazing.
It was really fun. I thought the pacing of it was really well done as well, where it's like at first it was like, it's a snowball. That's weird. Some things are acting strangely. Wait a minute. Data's been affected. Wait a minute. Now we've got, and then it's like the ship is now, and every scene that progresses, the ship gets more and more and more like the archive, I guess, or whatever, like more like
transformed,
sort of primitive, transformed. So I thought the pacing of it was really cool. I loved the way they told the story about like the observation lounge being a swamp or deck 12 being an aqueduct, where it's like they don't have to build it for us to see it, so no budget had to be used on that, but we still could like see it in our minds. I thought it was
because they could blow their budget on the temple, which was glorious. Loved it.
Which by the way, they ended up having to use the Deep Space Nine part of the DS9 set to build that temple, because DS9 was already up and running, and their regular TNG set, like their soundstage, was being dismantled from Thine Own Self from like the previous week, because they had just finished. They had just wrapped filming on that, like
right, and they had a whole city for Thine Own Self, like a whole new city.
They had they had a city, they had a town square, and then they had the house, so they had to dismantle all of that.
I wonder if that informed their decisions to keep all their shots on like the bridge and 10 forward for the entire. Probably, and maybe that's why. And they just said, let's just throw a palm frond out there. It'll be like, which
their
totally
main
worked though.
Soundstage was being dismantled while they were filming, so they had to use DS9s, which I thought was kind of cool. So, this episode was so much more fun than I remembered. What a fun way to discover a culture. You're so right. It is the inner light, but outer. It's really cool. I love seeing Picard use his archaeology skills. I feel like I have to say this. I need to put a buoy out there and say that it's not super safe to have Data around in general. Like he's cool when he's Data, but when he's taken over by so many freaking programs, you just end up with this like psychotic person with super strength running loose on the ship. That's a hard pass for me. But once he's Data again, I'm like, oh, hey, bud. But like, remember Data was taken over by those aliens that like wanted to be transported out of that storm cloud. So O'Brien and Troy and Data and Troy's Data fucking broke Worf's wrist and shit. I was like, dude, which I guess biological life forms were affected as well. But like Data just has too much strength for programming to be overridden. Like if Troy is like overtaken over, it's like, whatever. How much damage could she actually do? Like she's not a very big person. She doesn't seem to have like, Beta Zeds don't seem to exhibit like superhuman strength or whatever. So it's like, okay, you can kind of contain her with a force field. You just have to compete with like her wits maybe. But Data, he can be other voices. He could be like Enterprise, set, auto destruct sequence, Picard, Omega 4, 1 or whatever. And it's like in Picard's, but this is just dangerous. It's just dangerous. I'm just saying we need to do some like fail safes. What are your final thoughts on this episode?
I really like this one. I love seeing Brent Spiner playing all those different roles. And I really like that this episode is a bit of a mystery because you don't really know what's going on until like the very end when they say, oh, it's the sun and the moon. And then you're like, okay, now that does make sense, the sun and the moon. But they don't do that till like minute 40 of 45 or whatever.
Yeah, it's like act 4 or something where they finally come up with that out of like 6 acts. You're like, oh.
Yeah, you're like, okay, that makes sense. And I also, on the same note of like liking the pacing, I really enjoyed the dialogue because something that makes dialogue great is when a character wants information and the other character won't give it to them. That can make really good dialogue because it creates tension. Because you as the reader, you're like, well, what's the answer? And the other person's like being coy or playful or, obfuscating or whatever they're doing. And I really like how they chose to do that here, where every time Picard was trying to get an answer, like the personality would shift and you'd be like, oh, come on,
Dude,
because it keeps us so engaged as viewers to be like, But what is the answer? Is anyone going to tell us? Because that time when the old man finally gave up the symbol for Masaka's temple, like Ihat had said, try to get it out of the old man. Like he's never going to tell you. And you're like, oh my gosh. So when it switched to the old man, you're like, oh, we're never going to get this answer. And we need the answer. And so I really enjoyed the dialogue and how it kept the mystery going. And I feel like, even though it's kind of mythical and confusing, it also had a lot of sci-fi-ness and enough like sensibleness for you to be like, well, something is going on. So you could be like, something weird is going on, but also something technological is going on.
Yeah. So you're so right about that, because the idea of like Ihat being destroyed by Masaka, who are just like mythical figures, you're like, okay, but what danger really is there to the ship? They did a nice job of actually introducing some danger to the ship, because now the ship is being transformed so much that like it's not even going to be the ship after a while. You know what I mean? So it's like there was enough danger, because I remember as a kid being like, are we supposed to be scared of mythical personalities? Because they're not even real. But like it's real enough, and as you said, has enough like real life danger components that you're like, oh, we gotta solve this quick.
Yes, we have to solve this. This is like the opposite of that episode with Troy's mom, who was just like, there was no reason to solve it. Like they were like, oh well, she'll die eventually. You're like, eventually, come on, give us a clock. Be like, we have to solve this in the next 37 minutes or else. And then we'll be so like engaged and invested, and we'll be like, you gotta find a solution. But they were just like, they were just like, well, I mean, eventually, you know. You're like, we'll all die eventually. We need a little more.
Like, then why are we even rushing? Like, let's all go to lunch then.
Exactly.
There's no rush.
Exactly. So I felt like
I'm taking orders. Yeah.
They did a good job with this. They did kind of like their tried and true. We only have 2 hours left to complete destruction of the ship. But destruction in such a beautiful way. It wasn't like a bomb. It wasn't an alien virus. It wasn't any of that. It was just like little by little, we're going to be turned into an ancient society. Like how?
It won't be the ship anymore. So we're just going to be
so interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool. We'll probably all die because life support will turn into like a plant or another aqueduct or something.
Sure will. But we'll have a fun time riding that aqueduct like a water slide until we die. Anyway, this was a really fun episode. I'm so glad we got to do it. And it was nice to see Data. Like, you know, Brent Spiner, hats off to you times a billion, because like he acted his ass off for Thine Own Self. He acted his ass off for Masks. It's awesome. Now, next week, guys, we are breaking down season 7, episode 18, Eye of the Beholder. So Data gets like a little bit of a break in terms of carrying all the load. Thank you guys so much for nerding out with us, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Thanks for geeking out with us. Be sure to join the crew at thetngpodcast.com to be the first to know when we do our live shows or host events exclusively for our members. We'll see you next time.